why is change so hard? When we know that something needs to give, and yet it's so difficult to implement. It's easiest to understand this by using the hand on the stove metaphor. So imagine that you have your hand on the stove, and it burns and it hurts. And you look around and everybody else seems to be fine with you having your hand on the stove. And you might even ask people and say, oh, this is uncomfortable, I'm not okay with this. And they might be like, oh, you're fine, it's no problem, you're fine. And because we're such a social species, and we're always walking this tightrope between our need to belong and our need for independence, then we often will try to do whatever it is that we think is the norm. And so we leave our hand on the stove, and it hurts. So now our new job is to figure out, how do I experience that hurt less? And we tap out. So we tap out in all sorts of ways. We'll detach, we'll focus on how helpless we are, we'll become preoccupied with work or sex, we'll start using alcohol or drugs or food as ways of distracting ourselves. Some people shop. Some people get stuck in what-if world, focusing on things that happened in the past or what might happen in the future. Some people get stuck and all wrapped up in what's going on for other people. What are they thinking or feeling about me, and reacting as if it's real. We're getting all caught up in other people's drama and giving them advice and then being offended when they don't take it. One of the most common ways that we also avoid that feeling of having our hand on the stove is we self-sabotage. We do things that we know aren't good for us and we beat ourselves up for it, or we don't do things that would be good for us and we beat ourselves up for it. And all of these are just strategies that are trying to, in the short term at least, help us by allowing us to keep our hand on the stove longer, because that's what we think we're supposed to do for our tribe. The problem is that all the while that we're doing those things, our hand is still burning on the stove. It's causing us more and more damage. But eventually there comes a time where we become aware that something has to change. Our fire alarm goes off, and it will signal to us that there's a problem. It's inviting us to be curious about what's going on, to be compassionate with ourselves about the situation that we're in, and then to have the courage to take action so that we can be safe again, just like with a fire alarm. So our fire alarm goes off, it tells us something needs to change, and the very first thing that needs to happen is we need to actually tap into what's going on in our experience. So if you go to therapy, for instance, the very first question is, so what's going on for you? When we do that, we tap in, and when we tap in, our hand has been on the stove and burning for quite a long time, usually by this point. So we tap into pain and suffering, and that's really uncomfortable. So we tap out. And that's why often with change, we take 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forwards, 1 step back. And with therapy, people often tap in and out of therapy numerous times before they actually stay in therapy long term and get benefit. And that's because when we tap in and tap out, then we never get to that point where we tap in long enough that we acknowledge, oh my goodness, this is causing so much suffering. I have to take my hand off the stove. I have to give myself permission to do this. And that's when the healing happens. So it's important to know that the thing that makes change so difficult, the thing that can make therapy so difficult, is that we're often not willing to experience that initial chunk of distress, that initial kind of period where we often even have an increase in some of our symptoms, because we're becoming appropriately distressed as we are acknowledging the extent of the problems in our life. But if you're willing to experience that, then on the other side of that is where all of the healing happens. So I would encourage all of you to start to change your relationship with distress. Recognize that it's just a fire alarm that's telling you that there's a mismatch between the organism and the environment, between you and whatever is going on in your life, and that you can respond to it with curiosity, compassion, and courage. I hope this was helpful. Come see us again next time.